Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose,
Rose?
and today Naomi sent a wonderful email
Thank
asking about, and thank you, Naomi, for always being
Yes,
here and your
thank you.
wonderful comments, and really appreciated your email. And yeah, it's a fantastic question on, first, like, what does it mean first, I guess, like, what are conditions of possibility? If you're enclosed in something, how do you perceive a need for a change of conditions of possibility? So what does it mean? So her email was asking, which I think is a great question. It was about if someone is in something they can't get out of, they need to change the conditions of possibility. Like if you're enclosed in something, you need to change the conditions of possibility. But then it's like, how do you see that? If
Mhm.
you're in something, how do you see you're in something,
Yeah.
right? And what also would it mean? And, we've talked a lot about energy and kind of feeling different energy flows, and that seems to be part of it. But I think it's an excellent question. Like, how does the rational brain kind of perceive being stuck in conditions of possibility? And I guess it also just had me reflecting on kinda what even, I suppose, started philosophy for me without knowing it was philosophy. Grant Mimo once said just that phrase, "Yeah, no one gets married planning to get a divorce."
Yeah.
And the reason why that was such a big deal to me is, I was like, well, when people get married, they're willing to give their lives over to someone. They're willing to basically do anything just for a glimpse of them. And
Yeah.
then they get to this place where they just absolutely hate one another.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Yeah.
How must the brain structure reality towards you to make you genuinely feel like you do anything for someone, and then one day get to the place where you don't want anything to do with them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, that was going, golly. And then there were ideas from Augustine on there's no such thing as a good intention. I mean, a bad intention. If you
Right.
intend something, you think it's good,
Right.
and you only can intend the good. And yet people intend the good and do bad all the time.
Right.
Then looking at Harold Bloom on irony, and I understand irony to be where X does Y for Z, and Y is why X doesn't get Z. And I can go on, and there's, a philosopher who talks about, self-deception, because all of this is kind of pointing towards self-deception.
Mhm.
And for me, a lot of it was like, wow, the very way that we think about reality has this tendency to
Mhm.
like put us inside something.
Mhm.
To structure an immediacy would be a philosophical term, like a way we experience the world immediately. Hermeneutics, interpretation,
Mhm.
God, and all of these things. Like thinking is constantly kind of enclosing us in something.
Mhm.
And the thought was, well, what does it mean to think then?
Yeah.
And, personally, I always experience thinking as this weird, you think a thought, but then you immediately do a meta move on that thought precisely because of this problem of self deception that
Yes.
is lurking in every single thought. Like there, that even gets into the phenomenology of true ignorance. Like
Yeah.
you can know when you know something, you can know when you don't know something, but you can't know when you don't know something.
Mhm.
Right? So that means the way you experience the world must always be a via knowing, like you grasp. Because even when I look at something like, I don't know how that car works, but I grasp I don't know how that car works, so
Right.
even I get a feeling of understanding. So I
Yeah.
can't experience reality with a feeling of not grasping, like, or not knowing what I don't know, right? So so in a way you're constantly being set up by thinking to overestimate, to have overconfidence. And I'll throw it to you for just any opening thoughts, but to me that means thinking is a problem. And I honestly, it just out the gate points to why I think you have to philosophize your life, because if
Yeah.
every thought has the potential of doing this, which is
Yeah.
ultimately what it comes down to, you're going to want to turn around and do a meta move on that thought. Like, what
Yeah.
does that mean? Or maybe like you want to think about the thought you just had as a kind of checks and balances against the natural way that thinking is enclosing you. And then just to point on Naomi's great question, if you know thought is doing that, it suggests the possibility of an outside. So even if you can't directly experience what is outside the way thought is making reality appear to you, there would be
Mhm.
reason to think that there is something beyond it, right? But
Mhm.
then this gets into the old Kantian noumenon. How do you know the phenon of itself and all of that other
Mhm.
jazz, which then
Mhm.
gets to Hegel to other things. But I'll throw it to you for any
Yeah.
opening thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's all very good. And thank you so much, Naomi, for your question and for your kind presence here with us. And yeah, I think that's a tremendous question. And I think that for me, what stands out also in what you were saying is um, the idea again that thought. in a sense, you kind of have to be right. Like
Yeah.
unto your own brain and unto your own survival, you kind of have to be
Be
right.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's not, we could, we talk about it like the frenemy brain,
Yeah.
right? Where
Oh yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a friend and an enemy.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, uh, if we want to think about it in different terms, it's not necessarily that it's wrong. It's just that it thinks it's right, but it can put you into problematic dynamics.
It's a
That's
structural problem. And also, just
well,
because the brain must think it's right doesn't mean it isn't right. But it's this structural problem we have to wrestle with.
right, and it's a problem that you, in a sense, never solve, but you
Right. You
manage. We
manage.
talk about that
Yeah.
distinction big time,
Yeah.
and also problems aren't. Um, like it can only be thought of as merely problematic, but really it can also be seen as a wonderful obstacle by
Yeah.
which
To
you,
develop.
yeah, climb higher or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not it's so just to kind of even problematize the word problem there.
Sure.
uh
Sure. Because there's an argument to be made that thought that did not do this could not develop like thought that does.
exactly, it's like a necessary, it's kind of like it feels Hegelian a little
Yeah.
bit, right? Where like
Absolutely.
it's this necessary failure or something like that,
Yeah. Because you could
which we
argue.
never experience in real, like in the moment, as failure, even though, sorry, go ahead, what are you gonna
Well, I
say?
was gonna say you could argue maybe if there's some to the degree animals can think, perhaps they don't have to think the failure of thought. It's just more the
Hmm.
instincts and the immediacy, right? Where
Yeah.
humans, the immediacy becomes a problem,
Hmm.
actually.
Yeah. Well, for me, also, how I think about it is like we've talked about this before extensively, well, off camera too, extensively about this, but um, there's something about this idea of your brain has to essentially be right
Yes.
that, again, can create problematic dynamics. It's also, though, how it can, for the most part, function.
Function.
So it's
Absolutely.
sort of, it's kind of like I don't want to say necessary evil, but it's a necessary way in which the brain works. But when you can become aware of that, that's what's so huge, and that's what so opens up so much potential, right, and
Hmm.
possibility. Um, and now I'm thinking every time I use the word possibility about our probable
Yeah,
possible
probably.
decision, right? But yes, it's when you bring that awareness, that's really huge. Now, at first that can be devastating, right? Because that awareness makes you feel like, well, how can I ever think again? Like,
Yeah.
how can I ever
Right.
think
Right. Right.
right, or the right?
Right.
If you're kind of, that's the kind of funny thing about it. The ironic thing is that you actually start to learn how to think more rightly when you understand your brain's always going to have to be right. So then you deconstruct that, not to put yourself in perpetual relativism and uncertainty, but to destabilize certain things so that you can actually get movement in your thought, movement in your life, movement in your body, movement in the way you experience things. um so yeah, it's sort of working with its structure, or
Yes.
working with the way it
Yes.
is.
Yes. Yes.
And so yeah, that's just I and really quick, what's so funny is our brain kind of has to be right, right? But then we run into the fact that suddenly that feels very wrong.
Yeah.
Because what feels wrong, or what can sometimes happen in our existence, is that we might hit these patches, or engagements, or like we encounter something, blah blah blah, or we experience something that feels very immobile. That's why movement to me is a big juxtaposition here, because you feel stuck,
Mm.
right? You can feel it's really, it's a very almost all consuming stuckness that one can feel in their own. But again, if you're right, then you're right about being stuck.
Exactly.
Yeah,
See. Yeah.
you are stuck. There's
Yep.
nothing you can do about it. Like if
Right.
you're truly stuck, you're not going anywhere,
Right.
and your thoughts can't go anywhere, and you can't really make any progress,
Yes.
or you can't make
Yes.
any advancement, or you can't sort of sublate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. um but I do think it's really important to realize that often that is a perception,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
That is a perception of, like, what can be helpful to me, because I think every human has probably felt stuck at some point in their lives, is to realize that there is something here where I am deciding that this feeling right now, and whatever I'm doing or not doing, is what I'm calling stuck.
Yes.
Could I actually run around? Like, what do we mean by stuck? We don't mean physically. We
Mhm.
mean psychologically, right?
Mhm.
Probably. We mean psychologically. We might feel stuck in a certain relation,
Mhm.
because it feels very difficult. And that's where it's very hard, because you can't control the other person.
Right.
So then you're like, I really don't know what to do. I can do stuff in my own self, but I really can't do anything for them. Now, I do think we can mirror in each other, and there can be ripple effects, etc. But there's also just the reality that you can't control another
Right.
person, and you can only control yourself. Um, but yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that, because for me, thinking about uh changing the conditions of possibility so that you could get unstuck, because most humans don't like feeling stuck.
Mhm.
Well, we don't and we do, right? Because in a sense, our brain will want us, like, we'll be comfortable in our misery, right?
Yes.
And and nobody's like intending that. I'm not like trying to blame anyone. We all do this, you know. But how we can get out of that, because I do think there's a desire to get, and when you feel that feeling of identification as stuck, or you label it as stuckness, then you usually do want to get unstuck. You want to get out of that feeling. And so, yeah, for me, conditions of possibility have a lot to do, in my opinion, with like concrete stuff. Like, and I've been learning that more and more, I think, as it relates to like the philosophical life was never meant to just be talking and reading, even though that's a big part of it.
Mm.
Like, read, write, talk, yes. And what is your body doing?
Yep.
Because if your body's, because the Greeks, I think about the Greeks, right? The Greeks would think it absurd to like never have a physical
Mhm.
embodiment of what their philosophy meant.
Sure.
Now that can also feel daunting sometimes, right? 'Cause, well, how do, what is there, this is there, again, our brain goes back to right. So what's the right thing to do? But a lot of it would have been very intuitive and woven into the fabric of our reality in the past, right? You go down to get water, you do, you walk
Mhm.
here, you move here, you get in the water. Like, there's all these things that people used to just do inherently, that would have been practices that would be conditions that would inform their psychology or their
Mhm.
psychological escape. So, anyways, there's a lot there, but I just want to say really quick, like, again, about the stuckness thing, about how we perceive it, how that's actually can be both, yeah, it can feel in some ways infuriating, because it's like, well, I don't just feel stuck, I am stuck, right?
Yes.
And I get that, I really do. But there's actually a freedom in realizing that part of it is your perception, because then you might be able to recreate that.
Well, I mean,
You know?
ultimately, all this means if you don't realize it's your perception, you're doomed. Like there is basically no way out then, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the problem I think Naomi is pointing to,
Yeah.
right? Like if
Like the,
you're enclosed in something,
yeah.
then that's that. Like how would you know you
What's,
were
isn't it
enclosed?
Kierkegaard talking about the man in despair, or like,
Yeah, the man is in despair, does another in despair, right?
exactly,
But
exactly.
that for I guess going back to our book that doesn't exist anymore. Ironically, like this problem is at the heart of our thinking. It's
Mm.
at the heart of
Mhm.
all the short stories.
Mhm.
It's at the heart of so much. If you're looking at a duck bunny and can't say it's a duck or a bunny, you're stuck in the ambiguity.
Mhm.
What's reality?
Mhm.
All of these kind of interesting kind of paradoxes,
Mhm.
you could say. Well, there. So for me, on this idea that your very experience of the world is set up like you must experience the world in a manner that could entrap you, right? Because you like you were saying, you cannot experience yourself being wrong. And everyone may be like, I've gotten quite what do you mean? I can go two
I
plus
feel
two
wrong all the
all the
time.
time. That's correct.
Mhm.
But you know that you're wrong.
But you feel certain that you're
That
wrong.
you're
That's
wrong.
why certainty is
That's
big
the
for me.
issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's like you can but so you have this issue where if you're wrong, you immediately correct it with knowledge, right?
Mhm.
So you have this experience of well, this is the other I guess I want to say to the degree people feel wrong, they feel something that they can often improve at or correct and thus advance. So the experience
Well,
of
again, and
being wrong brings with it progress, you
right,
could
and
even.
just to repeat it, because I think it's an important way to understand the language of it. You feel right about being wrong.
Yeah, you feel
You
right about
feel
being
like
wrong.
you're right in your assessment that you're
Yeah,
wrong.
that's right.
So yeah, it's the rightness is going to be there.
You can't
Usually,
escape
yeah,
it.
yeah,
You can't escape it, or it'd be chaos.
yeah,
Like it's a necessary structural
yeah.
reality, right? So, and also, if you must intend the good, there are just all these dimensions about the way we experience the world. That means we're prone to get trapped in something, and that would also suggest why so many relationships go wrong. Is because the people in the relationships are entrapped. They get entrapped in the presence of the other person,
Mhm.
and they're not able to basically bring the other in because their very way of experiencing the world says they shouldn't have to. That the spouse is wrong, the husband is wrong, the wife
Mhm.
is wrong, or whoever, right? So, and in fact, if you were to come over to their side, you would be, giving credence to a falsehood or a lie, or you'd be enabling something evil, right? Like that
Mhm.
happens all the time in relationships. So, this tendency of enclosure, but the question becomes, how do you recognize that enclosures exist?
Okay, yeah.
Because you can experience them in a certain sense, right?
Mm.
You can't experience yourself in an enclosure, so then how do you come to believe enclosures exist? Do you understand what
Mhm.
I'm saying? For me, it's by I don't think anyone has any trouble though experiencing other people in enclosures. You see it all the time, like,
Yeah,
oh, they're in a bad relationship and they won't acknowledge it, or
yeah.
they have their ideas of what's the good and they won't come out of it. You just have to do one move. If that can happen to them, then it can happen to me.
Mhm.
That's it. Like, you basically
And
but
that's
notice
where we're
your experience of the way and this gets into the absolute choice. This is big. This is the choice that I will identify with other. I equal other in the Hegelian movement from basically, like, to, reason to spirit. Like, this movement is a really, really big deal. Because you begin to basically identify that you can go, like, the reality of other people is real.
Mhm.
But nothing in your experience says to you that you have to identify with otherness. You can always
Mhm.
say, well, they're just stupid. They're
Mhm.
just in denial. Like, they're just evil or they're just ignorant, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's why there's no
Yeah.
such thing as enclosure. There's
Exactly.
just stupidity or evil or wrong. Kathy Schultz talks about,
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
when we encounter people who are wrong or we think we're wrong, we either think they don't have the right information, so you need to educate them. They're
Right.
stupid, they can't comprehend the truth, or
Yeah.
they're evil,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if you understand that actually you can be right and wrong at the same time, that changes everything.
Yep.
But if you don't have like enclosures don't exist where you don't have the phenomenology we're describing, which gets tied to what the human being is to make that horizon and way of experiencing, right? So when you see other people in it, you can have like in their enclosures, you'll have the temptation to say they're just stupid or evil or whatever.
Mhm.
But no, you instead make the move that then changes the nature of reality. Basically, it's an absolute choice. It changes the nature of the absolute. For me,
Right.
it's ultimately identifying with absolute knowing in Hegel, which is a sort of acceptance of limit. If you see other people in these problems, you simply go, well, I could do that as
Yeah.
well. And you also say, well, none of those people intended to be into those problems, right?
Yeah.
So now you've gained a certain criticism of your own way of experiencing reality. And if you've seen other people end up in enclosures, then you realize that you yourself could end up in those enclosures. And now you're no longer a slave to your immediacy. And basically, and I'll give it to you, basically, until you realize this, then all conversation about changing conditions of possibility are not going to apply. Like, you can't begin talking about changing conditions of possibility unless you begin talking about changing people's experience of their immediacy, which gets into qualitative transformations. Like, you qualitatively blah, 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 qualitatively change how you
Qualitatively.
experience
Yeah.
your own thinking about thinking, and that you have a very, very different
Mhm.
relationship
Mhm.
with thought. But let me
Mhm.
give it to you.
Yeah. No, that's all very good. That's all very, very good. Yeah, I guess somebody I was just sort of thinking as you were talking about the fact that somebody would might come along and say, okay, okay, enclosures. It's not really a term that most people
Mhm.
think about
Right.
or use or anything
Because
like
nowhere in
that.
their experience do they need it. Those people who are in quote
Well,
unquote enclosures are just wrong or uneducated
right,
or
right.
something.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is somebody could say, well, you're thinking about enclosure as a bad thing here.
Yeah.
Like, um, but what about the
It's a
that
bad thing when you're not aware of it, and yet it's a necessary risk for survival and functioning.
Mhm.
Like, you can't it's like saying you have to have a map. You have to have a map.
Exactly. I was going to say like, and that's the thing. We,
Maps and enclosures go together.
right. I mean, somebody could say when we were talking big on like limits and such,
Mhm.
that aren't those types of chosen enclosures, etc.
Sure. Sure, sure.
Um, yes, and we are talking about enclosures in a particular way, which is the unaware enclosed posture that then limits your ability, limits in the sense of again, limits can be a good thing, of course, but uh, well, it's also unlimited because when you're in an enclosure, it is also in a sense, if we think about the Ouroboros, right? It's going to perpetually, be unlimited in its enclosure,
Yes.
really. And um, so yeah, and I mean, the only way I think about it, I guess just as growing up, a lot of times my understanding of enclosure was more like things could not people would have a desire for something and they just I've tried it, they couldn't make it happen, like it didn't happen, and you're like, how, why? And you were saying about like this, like I was thinking about how maybe when we experience the other in something difficult that you wish you could help, you wish you could change, you
Yes.
wish you could fix,
Right.
that's where you probably feel the most in touch with your wrongness, like but you still feel usually pretty right that you're
You
either not
can't.
doing
Like,
enough,
you're
or
right
you're,
that you can't.
yeah, or
Right.
that that you should feel guilty because you
Yeah.
could be doing more, things like that.
Yeah.
So there's still a rightness there, but um yes, what I was trying to say is that that's the one thing that I think enclosure could, no, not that I knew that word back when I was
Sure.
16 or something, but that is a kind of enclosure,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
obviously.
yeah.
And then also, kind of the obvious examples, right? Like addictions and stuff
Sure.
like that, right? It's like, oh my goodness, like they're just
Mhm.
really trapped. They're trapped. So it's a locked in kind of
Yes.
trapped. And it's funny because there's a redemptive term locked in that I probably learned through you, honestly.
Mhm.
But like this kind of idea of being like all in, locked in, you're in the zone of the flow, whether it's creatively or in conversation or whatever it is. So there's a way to be like um in a good sense locked in. Like all of these things can have, like, again, even enclosure could have a
Yeah.
sublated form, but there is this locked in where you're trapped, you're stuck, and I think when you hit the limits, like when you starting to bring awareness to that. Now, can I don't know that you can make anyone aware, oh, in the sense that, okay, so we're talking about this idea of the man who's in despair does not know he's in despair, right? Like, how does somebody know that they're in enclosure? Or
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I think that if you're even willing to entertain conversations about enclosure, you probably have a better chance at being able to have some sense of awareness. Now, the brain is quite good at self-deception, but really, I do think there's something phenomenological that we can feel, like in our bodies, in the energy of what it means to feel enclosed versus, um, you know, good limits, right? Or like the openness that hopefully can counteract, in a sense, pure enclosure or something like that. So I just, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a way in which, like, maybe it's when you, I don't know, it's a lot of those moments where, yeah, your wife walks in with divorce papers, right? It's like that shock that then the person's like, I'm not saying it has to be moments like that, but for a lot of people, it may come to
Yeah.
moments like that
Yeah.
because there's not, maybe because of, unfortunately, not having philosophical training in our
Yeah.
pedagogy and school and such like that. We don't really think about those things until something kind of,
Yeah. It's either beauty or
yeah,
devastation.
or it's
Yeah.
beauty too. But yeah, there's also the idea of like being able to start to witness patterns, whether in yourself or others, that then you're like, oh, I see there's a kind of enclosure happening. And how to combat that would take, again, changing conditions of possibility, which means, you know, actually doing things differently in your life,
Yeah.
like being
Yeah.
able to
Yeah.
actually shift things and see the fruit, like, see what is the feedback loop of shifting that. So, anyways,
Yeah.
there's a lot there. I'll send it back your way.
Well, there's a lot, and it's very good. So the relation between limit and enclosure is really strongly tied together.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
but the first thing I want to say is there's also a really strong connection between enclosure and sin.
Oh
Like,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I was
that
gonna say that
sin and
too.
enclosure.
Yeah,
But
that's how I knew it
basically,
as a younger,
yes, but
yeah.
basically, what is being suggested is that the very phenomenological way that humans must experience reality has a certain sinful orientation, you could say. I don't mean
Mm.
that in a moral
Mhm,
sense,
mhm.
but in an
Like a
ontological.
isomorphic structure, kind
Yes,
of. Mhm,
yes,
mhm,
because I think we've made a mistake to emphasize sin as ethical as opposed to ontological.
mm,
And there's
mhm,
this way that, people perhaps of more of the Calvinist camp or the Protestant camp, but Calvin particularly with Tulip, have stressed the kind of idea that sin is somehow ontological, that, that we're fallen. It's not merely about the ethical, but there's something in the very being of human beings. And there's a way in which I disagree with that, but there's also a way in which what they're getting at is correct.
mhm,
Because, what you're trying I think what you have to what I think is, I dare I say, a good aim is to hold something more like a sacramental ontology,
mhm,
kind of the idea
mhm,
that humans are made in the image and likeness of God, and that
mhm,
that image is maintained.
mhm,
And yet, nevertheless, there is something about humans of which sin is deeper than just an ethical mistake. And I think you can possibly um, thread that needle by saying that the ontological dimensions of sin are phenomenological, and yet human beings ontologically are sacramental all the same, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, you want to say sin has some kind of ontological depth, but not go so far as where you say humans are totally depraved and therefore rationality is broken and that we can't, the world can't be redeemed, because you have that tension in Protestantism, right? Where, humans are totally fallen and we just need to, we can't do anything right,
right, right,
and
right,
all of that, which
right,
seems very problematic.
right.
And yet it also seems problematic to lose that emphasis on
Mm,
sin as deep in Protestantism. Like, there
mm,
seems to be something very valuable about this emphasis on sin being deep in Protestantism, but then there's something completely, utterly invaluable
mm,
about this emphasis on,
mm,
humans being made in the image and likeness of God.
mm,
That sin is not ontological, right?
mm,
I think by saying that there's something about the phenomenology of human beings
mm,
that lends itself in the direction of sin as enclosure, that you can see how those two positions can kind of
Mhm,
go together,
mm,
if that's making
mhm.
sense.
Yeah, it's making a lot of sense. And I will say, you can kind of loosen the grip of the moralism a little bit there. We're talking more about this again, sin is ontological in the
Yes,
sense that the way our brains are structured
yes,
tends to lead us into enclosure.
yes.
And that's
And thus sin,
in
because
the
when
sin,
you're
yeah.
enclosed,
Right.
you're eaten alive by anger, you
Yeah.
despair.
Or paralysis,
That's
et cetera, et
correct.
cetera. Yeah, right, right. And that's yeah. And yeah, a lot of times, like, I was just thinking about Jesus' miracles, right? He's like, the man can walk now, blind can see. There's like this being able to get in touch with like something that is in movement and in openness and
Mhm.
in clarity, which is the opposite of
Yes.
stuck, right? Um, I was also thinking as you were talking about this, the cyclical nature of enclosure, like the Orbos, and
Mhm.
how, I think I forget. I was told this at some point. I didn't know if I checked the validity of it, but I've heard that sin is the meaning of it can also mean to miss the mark, like
Sure,
in
sure,
archery
sure.
terms or something like that. Go look it up and see that I'm wrong here. But basically, though, I had this idea of like what's sin is about, in a sense, missing the mark because you're not there's the aim isn't out, like it's not, it's the enclosure never lets you kind of get what the very thing you're like after. It's this,
Correct,
and it's stuck in that way.
correct, correct.
Hamster wheel, think about that. So whereas like the I want to say the opposite, but yeah, the way to, in a sense, the yeah, the comparison would be when to counteract enclosure and sin would be to actually have the trajectory. It's like
Yes.
it has the arrow going towards its vision or its
But
target or
how do
its
you
aim.
have the right trajectory if your entire experience is such that if you don't have the right trajectory, you can't know? You see, you like
Yeah,
because you're in an enclosure,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
that's like the $1,000,000 problem.
Hmm.
And but I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
For me, again, and the reason why there's overlap between ontology and phenomenology is because phenomenology is not merely the question of experience, but
Yeah.
experience and then asking what must reality be like with a being so experiencing to
Hmm.
have X perception, X experience, and not
Hmm.
Y.
Hmm.
And if we think about sin as having something to do with the phenomenology of enclosures, then that would suggest there is something ontological of
Hmm.
which is making enclosure occur,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Of which could go in the direction of sin. But then, if we don't want to give sin
Yeah.
substance, because then you have
Hmm.
a metaphysical problem there. So whatever is making the risk of enclosure would also have to potentially go in the direction of sanctification. You see
Yes.
what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So this is why you can't simply say enclosure is bad,
Right.
because it seems to be a necessary condition of some sort of development that could not be afforded otherwise, right?
Yes.
But that condition must also run the risk of this sin, of this hell locked from the inside.
Mm.
Um, Now, second, this problem, this phenomenological problem, is also why we emphasize the non rational,
Hmm. Hmm.
because rationality is going to just serve the problem of enclosure unless
Yep.
you're aware of the problem, right?
Mhm.
But that means you have to do something that doesn't feel rational. And again, I have a bias toward non rational versus trans rational or supra rational, even though those terms are fine, because I think when you actually experience the thought that recognizes
Mhm.
enclosure, it feels crazy. It
Yeah.
feels nuts because we're talking about like, I mean, think about like we're talking about being aware of something you can't directly experience. That sounds kind of crazy, right? That doesn't feel necessarily
Yet.
transcent yet, of
Yet.
course, but it
It's not
doesn't.
that you can
No,
experience it. It's
the
that it's yet.
non-rational can become
Mhm.
like a feeling of transcendence, but
Hmm.
not in the initial, and that's kind of why cross comes before resurrection and
Yeah.
stuff. But please,
Well, just really quick, yeah, I think it makes me think a lot. And I bring it up a lot, but about the village women and the
hmm
because a lot of times there's this um, hey, get outside and see the sunrise.
sure,
Go
sure,
like get your body moving
yes,
more, get your feet on the ground, like actually get your feet on the ground. If you're wearing, get your actual bare eyes in the sun, or at
yeah.
least
Is
sort of
that
morning
rational?
morning sunlight.
Yeah,
Is that rational? No, it's non-rational in
yes.
a sense,
Until you do it.
until you do it, and if until you keep doing it and start to realize, oh my gosh, like
You see the
I'm actually
effect.
feeling different. I'm yeah, you see
Yep.
the effects, and it's like,
Yes.
but you can't know until you start to do. And that's why I think conditions of possibility have to be tied to literally even just in your mind non-rational baby step actions.
Yes.
Like what are
Oh,
the
yeah.
little tiny actions
Mhm.
that you can do that then you could see over time incrementally start to like really make a big impact on the way that you even experience reality, experience your
Yeah.
life and your own thinking.
Yeah, one of the reasons it's hard to grasp the non-rational is because if you do it and then it bears fruit, it's suddenly as if it was always already just rational because
Mhm.
you see the results. So then you lose sight of the non-rational
Mhm.
choice that afforded that recalibration of the
Mhm.
rational. And that's the problem. The phenomenology of rationality is always concealing the
Mhm.
non-rational element because,
Mhm.
go outside and feel the sunlight. I don't have time. I'm busy. It's going to be
Yeah.
actually
What would that do?
irresponsible. What would
What would
that
that do?
do?
Why would that make
Yeah,
such
you
a
have
big
a million
difference?
good
Yeah,
reasons to think it won't
your
work.
rationality is never
Yes,
going to allow
that's
you to think
exactly
that's going to be
right.
something
Unless you
that could
just
change your life.
decide, well, I'm going to give it a shot, and then it will be as if it was always already rational. And you see, you can always make the
Yeah.
argument that the non-rational was actually rational. But I want, and from a systems level, that would be true.
Mhm.
But the problem is, I want to emphasize the individual experience, which is what I think you need to emphasize if you want systems wise change, because that's getting into how the individual experience the world. And unless that changes, you're not going to have any, spread of any sort of transformation. So, relative to the individual, it is not inexperience something that feels rational.
Mhm.
It feels non-rational, or it feels like an act of faith or an act of, courage or crazy. But then
Absolutely.
afterwards, it's
Mhm.
as if it was always
And you
rational.
have to kind of be willing to do it, even though there's no guarantee. Like there's not a
Yes.
guarantee. Like nobody can promise
Yeah,
you,
there's no
oh well,
guarantee.
if you do this, I
Yeah.
promise you this.
And you can't systemize
At the
it.
same time, though, somebody who's been through it and has experienced it, they can kind of say, like, I promise you,
Yeah, but you
you
gotta
just go
trust
do
them.
it, and you'll start to see some differences, but you have to trust them. Yeah, you have to
Yeah, and
trust
you
them.
just experience, oh, that's cute. That's their own person. And because your phenomenology is going to other the other,
Oh,
right?
1000%.
So
And we also like to think it couldn't be that simple.
yeah,
Like,
we
or,
do like to
and
think
also
that.
the simple can suddenly become feel very impossible or
Yeah.
difficult
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it's hard to move when you'd rather just not move. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yes,
Like
yes,
to
and
get,
it should also be noted because once you do the non-rational, it can seem as if it was always already rational. That's why you're at risk of thinking all you need is rationality, and then you end up in autonomous rationality, and now you're trapped in all of the enclosures and
yeah.
dynamics. The other thing I was going to say, because there's a few things, is a way to think about enclosures is perhaps not so much, and language is tricky here, and
Hmm.
it won't always say this has been clear, but perhaps it helps to think about enclosures as more like kind of health, kind of associating with health. Because in the
Mm,
same
mm,
way
mm,
that like sin is more like health, like if you say
mm,
The
mm,
Christian never escapes sin, right? They're
mm.
always in the condition of its
Right,
possibility,
right.
right? So likewise, health. Enclosure is the condition like that is always lurking. Just like you could always get sick, you could always get bad health, right? There's a certain condition you have to manage your health, right? So similarly, I want to argue you have to manage your phenomenology like you have to manage your health. Like because the way you're prone, we're all kind of prone toward not having good health, honestly, toward laziness, toward the simple, toward eating processed food, right? Like we're prone in that direction,
Prone to
especially
enclosure.
to
Like,
that kind of enclosure, especially if you have not been curating your environments in a
yeah,
proper way,
yeah.
right? So likewise, we are in the same way we're prone toward bad health, we're prone toward enclosures because our phenomenology tends to enclose us, right? But it's not where you ever entirely escape enclosure. Likewise, you never escape map. You have to be
Yeah.
enclosed. You have to have limits to some degree to have
Mhm,
intelligibility.
mhm.
The problem is when the door shuts, like there's no opening, right? Like that's when you end up in trouble.
Yeah.
So enclosure, that is something that anyone at any point can fall into. You don't, it's not where like on this idea, or some people are in enclosure and some people are not in enclosure. Well, everyone has health, right? But some people are sick and some people aren't sick. And yet everyone also has health. So there are different degrees and different levels of the phenomenon. And also, the need to be aware of your health very consciously can vary based on if you've been in an accident or if you've been sick or so on. So there's a way in which I want to say everyone has a phenomenology. And perhaps, when I speak, there can be a blurring of just this condition of phenomenology that is this necessary experience of
Mhm.
being correct and enclosure.
Right.
So maybe everyone has phenomenology, but not everyone is in an enclosure, but everyone has the phenomenology of enclosure. Likewise, not everyone is sick, but everyone has the health of which can get sick.
For sure. It makes me think about the idea that um it is something that you again maintain. So
Mhm.
you do certain little things every single day that are
Yes.
beneficial or not
Yes.
beneficial to your
Yes.
health.
Yes.
Beneficial, not beneficial to your health, either way.
Yes.
And we do tend as humans in our in our sort of entropic is
Yeah.
that entropic
Yes.
natures to sort of do this sort of enclosure move. That's why so much of modernity people spend so much time indoors. They just kind of sit and you're sedentary.
Yes.
Like it's just that those little habits are not always as optimal for your like your full health and your full thriving and good
Yeah,
health
yeah, and
and good
maybe a way to
well-being,
put it is what sickness is to health, and closure is to metaphysics, and
right?
closure is into maybe what sickness is to physics, and closure is to
Yeah,
metaphysics.
and that way, I think too, like you were talking about the Calvinist with being fallen. In a sense, this is why we always have a map.
Yeah,
Like enclosure is a type of ontological reality
condition.
for
Yeah, it's an
humans, but it's
condition.
not.
It doesn't
When
have
you
to
get
have the final
no,
say.
and it doesn't have to be like you're saying this kind of static enclosure.
Yes,
It's more like the system that you operate within so that you can actually be healthy, right? And to be flourishing in the fact that you have a map. But your map needs to constantly be up like
yes,
you need to update your map given your exposure and your engagement with the territory.
mhm,
Does that make sense? So
yes.
um yeah, there's something interesting
Well,
there.
the
Like
the
in a sense
really
that we because I think too it's really one thing. How can it be then? Because it's a big conundrum, I think, wouldn't it be theologically? We're still fallen,
yes,
okay, but we can also be sanctified.
yeah,
We
and
so that's
that's
why
right.
there's this I think that's why it maps over to not use
Well,
that term
that's why there's
very well.
endless confusion
Yeah,
in
there's
Christianity.
because it is true. Like we are still well, if we take that as truth for Christian theology, we're still fallen in the sense that we could always make bad
Yeah.
decisions or start bad habits. However, we can also make good decisions and make good habits if you want to use the good bad dichotomy. But you know what I mean? Things that are more optimal and more vitalizing and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I mean, if we look at kind of health analogically here, because I do think health is a uniquely useful analog for these kind of things, and I also think it's health and the thinking of beauty go together, as Jockin has pointed out in his work, correctly. But in the same way that you could have an extremely good diet, you can be going to gym, but of course it is still theoretically possible that you just randomly lick a metal post covered in germs and get sick, right? To use a weird example. But the point is I'm saying is that you're always at risk of getting sick no matter what level of development you do in health, right? Because maybe you do something stupid or you're prone of you could always at any moment jump out of a car moving 60
yeah,
miles per hour, right?
yeah, injury.
And so in that sense, there's no amount of advancement in health that you can get that means you're not in a world where you can get sick, right? So likewise, there's no amount of say spiritual or metaphysical development of which means you're not potentially at risk of getting mad at someone and then enclosing yourself in self-righteousness, right? And in the same way that every
It
single day you have to do these steps to keep your good health, like sunlight and all the stuff that you've mentioned, so likewise, every single day you have to do the work to make sure you don't end up in an enclosure because of your
mhm,
phenomenology, which is when you're tempted to be angry at the guy who cut it in front of you at
yeah,
traffic or this guy who says
yeah.
something and you let the little voice in your head run in loops. Like you resist
Mhm.
that,
Well,
right?
people can hear that though and be like, "Oh, great, so I won't do anything," because
Yep.
unfortunately the brain goes to all or nothing, right? Well, if
Yes, it
there's nothing
does.
I can do to ever like never get sick or never have an injury or ever, then
Yes. Yes.
well, I should no, and that that's an unfortunate direction to take what we just said.
Yes.
And take it in that way. Now, somebody can take it in that way. They're
Yeah, they
free to
can
take it
take
in
it
that
that
way.
way.
However, it's really not. For me, when I hear that, what that makes me think about is the fact that yeah, we are in again. This goes to the ontological theology concept of we're in a fallen world. So
Yes.
you can take very good care of yourself and still, again, get an
Yes.
injury or something like that. Um, but I do think that when you do the small habits, you do become more robust. It does
Oh
make a
yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
Like those things do matter in the sense that you grow more resilience, you
Yes.
grow more, you're more mentally
Yeah, because what
adaptable.
I
Like
was gonna
you
say,
have more
yes.
agility in that way. So those things, it does matter to have the good to do the habits that are going to remind you of the potential of
Yes.
enclosure so that you don't do it, but it's not a paranoia. Like I think people can also hear that and they can get paranoid.
Paranoid. Yeah.
It's not to be paranoid, it's to realize that there is just life and death. Like there is just reality to gravity.
Well,
But you can actually do things that again help you to become more fully human in your resiliency, your adaptability, your potential to pivot when you need to be agile physically, etc. So anyways, go.
yeah,
Yep.
well, if exercise or good health increases your quality of energy, quality of everyday
Life,
life,
yeah.
because people are like, well, I know people who, exercised every day and died when they were 65, and I know people that don't ever exercise and live to be 90, right?
Mhm,
The issue is that's a quantitative argument for
mhm,
health,
mhm.
right?
You could
But
get to quality, yeah,
yeah, but if it's qualitative, meaning you actually feel more energetic or more alive,
alive, yeah.
or then of course, you have more experience of beauty, well, that's a different
Mhm,
argument,
mhm,
right? And that would be the argument too. It's like,
mhm.
well, if we're in a fallen, because the idea of, well, if we're in a fallen world and we're always fallen, why try to be a saint?
Exactly,
Well, because of the qualitative differences. You're more able to
1000%.
experience beauty, you have better conversations, better friendship, and so on and so
And you
forth,
are,
right?
I think if done like properly in a sense, like you are also, though a higher saint could fall
Yes.
more greatly, right?
Yes.
You do though often have a greater capacity, like your capacity
Well,
is
this is
better. Like
this is
you
what I
have
was gonna say, is that the way I think in a certain sense,
you still are prone to be human and to get grumbly,
yes.
but like you, I hope that if you're getting stronger, you are a little bit more quick to recognize that's not a good voice in my head,
Yes,
or
what
that's not a
I
good,
think
yeah.
the way you can kinda deal with this tension between saying you're always fallen, but
Hmm.
sanctification is possible,
Hmm.
um, is, if you
Like
do
that,
the
and to
things of
say that in another language, you're always in a sense, there's always enclosure, but you always have the potential to
yes.
get unstuck. Go
Yes,
ahead.
because if you're someone who takes care of your health, well, then you're probably don't have the habits of eating an entire chocolate cake one night or something, right? So you change your habits. Like, could you still lick a pole and get a bunch of bacteria or something? Could you still jump out of a car in despair or something?
Hmm.
Sure, you could because you're
Hmm.
still fallen,
Yeah,
but that you're out of the habit of doing that. You're
yeah.
likely not to do that, right? So likewise, when you get used to thinking in terms of the problem of your phenomenology and always having to do a meta move to think about your thinking or to draw your own phenomenology into question, then you develop a habit of thought that decreases the chance that you're stuck in enclosure.
Yes.
You're always at risk of enclosure,
Yeah.
but because the very risk of enclosure is what makes the possibility of intelligibility.
Hmm.
But those that necessary experience of being right or map or possible enclosure doesn't trap you.
Yes.
And you're trapped in signs that you've been so trapped is when you're losing energy, you're not able to actually have these kind of conversations that go on and
Mhm.
on. You don't have mystery, you don't have beauty, you
It's
feel
hard to
stuck.
function
It's hard to
just to do
function.
normal
You have
tasks. Yeah.
energetic experiences because
Yeah.
basically in physics, now this is all analogical, obviously, but a closed system, entropy takes over a closed system. When something is closed, entropy occurs, right? When something is open, then you can get negentropy, right? Now, negentropy ultimately could just be an acceleration of entropy, and that gets to the complexity science, but nevertheless, you get order. A good example of this is if you don't have guests coming over, your house can go into great disarray because it's a closed system, nobody's coming. But if somebody's coming over, suddenly order, suddenly energy can kind of appear. Likewise, so it actually goes metaphysically. Like if other people don't exist, you don't get your life in order because they don't, but if you identify with others and see them as just as important as your life and real, then you're actually more likely to get your life in order because other people matter. So there's something about the problem of enclosure
Mhm.
is actually tied to the likelihood you're going to end up in entropy or something. Please, please.
Yeah. Well, two things really quick. Yeah, I funny story. We were like cleaning up, and one of our children was like, "Mommy, Daddy, do we have somebody coming?" Didn't, but
Like, surely.
baby, we just like to keep the house tidy.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
mom.
Oh, okay. Hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. Um, and I also wanted to say that I think too this idea of the your actual mode of thinking and how that relates to your health and habits, etc., is important because I do think that a lot of times actually even the paradigm of health is really stuck in fear.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
it's really fear. It's fear. A lot of fear mongering. There's a lot of fear.
But the paradigm of
Um,
sin is an enclosure.
yeah,
People, that would
yeah.
create paranoia for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. And so it's really important to get very, that's where you have to get kind of discerning about your own self and your own agency and your own, yeah. And also realize like, also your limits, of course, but like there is a way in which, uh, like to do something fearfully to be healthy might not actually make you as healthy as if you do it joyfully to be
Yeah,
healthy,
sure.
or
Sure.
because it feels, it feels healthy to do it. Does that make sense? It feels like alive, and care or caring to do it. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, fear as a motivating factor, though obviously I'm not, fear exists, and like there are things too that
Hmm.
if you got a bear running at you, yeah, you probably will be
Hmm.
afraid and should
Yeah.
be. But
Yeah.
fact of the matter is, it's just what I'm trying to say is that how we even relate to things like health, which you're saying is this map, right? It's this kind of
Yeah.
working of a kind of ontology of enclosure,
Mhm.
um, is important to realize the desired openness you would like
Yes.
for more life and more vitality, etc. More, this experience of health as good and what and a gift,
Yes.
in it. It's about like the way you think about stuff is a very big factor in how you're going to be able to relate to health, to whatever it is, relationships, to your own lived experience, because you need to introduce some, like, fear will not allow a mobility. It's very enclosing, right? So you have to be able to, it's like just mouse in a corner, like that kind of fear, like you feel trapped in a corner or something like that. So I think I guess I'm just trying to highlight fear because I do think it's one of the big, big, big factors in the static enclosure, right?
Yes.
In this, because you get there and then you're almost afraid that you're afraid, and it's just this like this bad cycle,
Yes. Yes.
So combating fear, courage. We talk a lot about courage too.
Mhm.
Is a big part too in being able to move through the static enclosure
Yes.
to the ability to have mobility, uh, free, what will feel like more like freedom, more
Yes.
energy, and
Yes.
all of the good
Yes.
things that come when you move out of an enclosure into
Yes.
doing that non-rational leap of faith into to what is, I don't, what would you say is like the word we could use for like the opposite of enclosure? Openness? I mean, I
Um,
don't know. It's
sanctification. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. It's
there's
not merely openness, though. I do think there is something about enclosed open that is
courage.
at
I mean, a
place
lot of it
at
is
play.
courage.
Yeah,
Is a
but I'm
lot.
saying, like, if this is enclosure, what's not enclosure? Just
Absolute
nothing.
knowing, Nietzsche in childhood, those kind of terms that we'll
Hmm.
use in belonging
Hmm.
again, like a mode
Ch-
of being beautiful, the
Nietzsche in childhood, the
beautiful,
beautiful, yeah,
this
butterfly.
mode of
Hmm.
being that is more actually like open to what reality can present,
Yeah, yeah.
not you kind of say
Hmm.
what reality
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. No, that's all good.
There's,
In some ways, maybe that's good that it's hard to land it on one
yeah,
term. Enclosure is
absolutely.
like locked in that kind of one
Mystery,
term. Yeah,
mystery as this
mystery.
ever deepening
Yeah,
reality.
yeah,
It's more of that kind of stuff.
yeah. The dance of life.
There's a bunch of things. So, first off, someone may say, "Well, it sounds like you're afraid when people come over to your house to see that it's a mess or something like that, right?" How do
Ah,
you identify fear? That
mm,
fear because you see the issue is whenever you open, that is an act of facing fear because what
yeah,
could come in,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Like what
So
what could be seen or
yes,
whatever. Yeah.
so many times people do react to openness in fear, but it's to close it again, right?
Oh
Not to
yeah.
keep it open.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
for
People.
me,
Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
for me, like if you don't make sure that you say have ice cream, then that's going to take away from a certain experience that you can have. Like if the house is not together, you don't know where things are to facilitate the relationship, right?
What did you mean about ice cream a little
Like
bit?
if you haven't cleaned the fridge or you don't know
Oh,
you
you
have
won't know where
ice
it
cream,
is.
yeah, you won't know where it is or you
Mhm.
won't have it. So you have these options by which you can keep the festival of the gathering
Yeah, yeah,
going
yeah.
on, right? And furthermore, if the garage is a total mess and the kids want to play in it, it's dangerous,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
there's also some
yeah.
there's a difference between say the cleaning to facilitate and the movement of energy versus cleaning because you're embarrassed,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That but notice how it can look the same, right? So one of the issues is I think a lot of times a way that in the kind of tendency toward enclosure can even trick us is that we get trained to actually respond to moments of openness
Hmm.
with actually a fear
Hmm.
reaction
Hmm.
that then
Hmm.
makes our habit go back to the
Yeah,
enclosure, right?
exactly.
But if you actually say no, openness is supposed to be the norm, and it is about actually the kind of flow or the create. We've had in season 2 conversations about spaces and the
Hmm.
movement of
Hmm.
energy. What
Hmm.
you're actually trying to do is facilitate the movement of energy
Hmm.
and focus when people come over. And so you're actually doing it to keep the circle open, so
Right.
precisely so that
Hmm.
when they're there, you're surprised by what comes up. So the
Yeah.
unexpected can occur in their presence
Hmm.
while they're there, right?
Yeah.
But fear can have you react to opportunities for openness with that which sends you back to enclosure. So you really want to watch that. But what were you going
But
to
like
say?
you said, it can look the same
It
because
can look
I've
the
known
same.
people to be afraid of somebody's reaction, so they keep everything clean, they keep
Yes.
everything tidy, and it's not for the sake of
No,
like
facilitation.
fuller, yeah,
Yeah.
like this
Yeah.
festival feeling,
It's
if you will,
it's
like
in the realm of the ethical,
yeah,
the good. Well, this I mean
it's still.
ultimately too.
I mean, it's not like it's bad that they clean, but in a sense, like you have to realize that there's even a better version of that,
But we
which is
can't
cleaning not because you're afraid that somebody's going to be mad, but because it actually facilitates joy.
I mean, I know it's a major theme of what, we and, Jockin is so important on this topic. Um, thinking you can't think cleanliness properly without the beautiful.
Yeah,
If you only have the true or the good, it's good to be clean,
yeah,
but it's just an ethical thing. It has to be for the beautiful,
yeah.
right? So
And that
likewise,
and it can lead oh, sorry, go ahead,
you
Naomi.
can't sustain openness from enclosure without the beautiful because it's
No,
good to be open, but
yeah,
then it's hard and someone says something and you're going to close again, right?
yeah,
It's not enough to stay open because it's good. You have to have a
yeah.
strike of beauty, otherwise you're not going to do the work
Yeah, and somebody in that position can
or
unfortunately
change
grow.
the habits. You're not going to do the work and change the
Yeah.
habits.
Somebody can get grow quite, bitter
Oh
and
yes, oh yes.
sad and despairing because they feel like they have to do this, otherwise somebody's going to be upset. And that's, you know, you got a clean space, but you have somebody dealing with the internal, basically the ingredients for depression,
Oh yeah.
anxiety,
I
and
mean,
all of that, which is
perhaps all good things turn into bitterness without beauty. Like,
I
perhaps
think that's
perhaps that's also how you could argue that God has structured into the good a almost intentional failure to move it toward the beautiful. And I think that actually kind of points to there are other things, but on this idea of the enclosure, like there is something about the way that our phenomenology that has this sin tendency in terms of
yeah, yeah,
ontology that is precisely then forcing us to kind of move beyond our immediacy.
yeah.
Now, you could say that therefore, in the structure, that human phenomenology points toward faith. Like it points toward the necessity of faith to have your eyes on the unseen,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, other ways to put it, if we use another way to think about the enclosure problem and how it relates to limits, if we think about Hegel and Alex Ebert is really good on this as well, is basically, as I understand it, right or wrong, and don't take me as a master Hegel scholar or anything, but there's an idea that at absolute knowing, you come to realize that you are limited from experiencing your limits. So you seem unlimited. You must, in your experience of the world, not feel limited.
Yep.
I get that that's a tree, like whatever you think you're correct about, like you're limited from experiencing your limits.
Mhm.
Do you see?
Yeah.
Therefore, you have a phenomenology of unlimitedness,
Mhm.
right? But that's actually a testament to being limited because you can't experience your limits,
Yeah.
which there that kind of lines up with the sin stuff because in sin it's pride, you're like God,
Yeah.
you actually don't need God, all of that, right? But actually, then, therefore, there's more power in an acknowledgement of the limits that you can't experience. So, actually, in a weird way, the feeling of being unlimited is weaker than the acceptance that you are limited, right? Because you're limited from experiencing your limits. Therefore, you feel unlimited. But that actually, in a very real way, is weaker then from a place of not being able to experience your limits, acknowledge they're there, right?
Mhm.
So that extremely weird move that's kind of hard
Mhm.
to get your head around
Yeah.
is for like Hegel basically that is the move of philosophy. Like there is no philosophy without that. Like that's where he ends the phenomenology of spirit with absolute knowing. And in a way, it's not philosophy proper at all. Like the science of logic is philosophy proper. So for him, philosophy doesn't really begin until you realize you're limited from experiencing your limits. Well, that means you have to think them abstractly. This is why philosophy, you must philosophize your life or you're basically a victim of your phenomenology.
Yeah.
Like, because the only way to tarry with the limits of your experience is to think them in the abstraction. And you must do it with others because others are the only ones that can have this kind of feedback loop to help you manage your enclosure tendency.
Mhm.
So you must identify with otherness and therefore the philosophical dialogue. That's like going to the gym.
Yeah.
Basically, without the philosophical dialogue, you're going to fall back into the habit of you're naturally being habituated by an experience of the world where you're limited from your limits. Therefore, you're naturally habituated into thinking you're unlimited, even if you would never say that directly, right?
Mhm.
To train that natural formation of your subconscious and natural formation of your habits, you need to have regular experiences and dialogues and thoughts that are reminding you of the limits that you're limited from experiencing. And that's where you kind of say, well, what is freedom? The meta conversations, the conversations with other people. You're constantly kind of turning on your own experience and questioning them in order to identify if there's a limit you're limited from experiencing. And then the last thing I'll say and throw it to you is that creates an endless motion That creates an endless motion, and the idea that human beings are better off thanks to that endless motion than not, if you say from like God's point of view, is that endless motion is the eternal development of sanctification that is only possible in the human being if there's the risk of enclosure.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't have that ontological structure unless there was the risk of enclosure. And
Mhm.
therefore, in that sense, enclosure is the risk of enclosure is a blessing. In
Yes.
the same way that health is a blessing, even though you could get sick,
Mhm.
even though, stuff like that can occur. But please.
Yeah. That's tricky, Daniel. I
Yes.
mean, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this is absolute knowledge and it's Hegel, this is like, in a sense, kind of the pinnacle, right? In a
It's the
sense,
beginning of philosophy, but this is the weird move of Hegel. Like he means that it's like the
where you
absolute
can,
limit of thought. Like the absolute knowing is when you accept that part of the absolute is the tearing with limits.
right,
That you're limited from even experiencing.
right. But could that be like, I'm not saying that's like the end all be all, because
Yes,
what it is
sure.
actually the beginning, right? It's the
Yes,
beginning.
yes,
But I hear that and think, wow, couldn't that be a really wonderful way to live? In that you're limited from experiencing your own limits. Is that what you said?
yes, yes.
So you start to feel like actually I can make stuff happen, like
But
in a good way,
that's the great irony is
like
when you
oh my
realize
gosh,
I'm
I can envision something and I can
yes.
make I can move, I can do it, I can make stuff happen.
And this is for Hegel, as I understand it, the true birth of thought. Like thought is now incredibly powerful,
Mm.
but it's powerful from acknowledging limit,
Yes,
right? And so it's like, wow, I actually am aware of limits, so now I can move them. You could say, like that's the thing. When you're limited and you don't know you're limited, then you're stuck. You can't do
yeah.
anything. Those limits still
Well,
run your life, and you don't know
mhm,
it. But
mhm.
when you're aware of your limits, well, now you can move them. Now you can change them. Now you can shift them or identify with your determinations. You're actually given more, in a sense, power in those
To
limits.
accept them and then
Yes,
do the
yes.
flourishing that comes with that limit,
Yes,
right?
and that gets back to the reason why I say all this is it gets back to what we were saying about the work of limits.
Yes,
Now
yes,
emergence can happen.
yes, exactly.
The
Well,
problem is how does the individual accept limit so that emergence occurs when we're limited from experiencing limit? You need abstract thought.
yeah.
Now you can accept a limit by which emergence can
But
occur.
don't people who feel like, and I was going to ask this question before too, and I might have another question on
Yes.
this Hegel stuff, but um, wouldn't somebody say like, no, Daniel, like I absolutely accept my limit. I feel stuck. Like I feel my limit.
You know the truth. You're not limited. You know the case. This is the weird move. Like when you say, I know I'm limited, well, then you're not limited. You know you're limited, right? Like you know what's up, right? You don't
Exactly.
question your ability to
Well,
know
that's
you're stuck. That's the weird move.
hmm well, and that's where I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying in the beginning about perception, where it's like if you can have the sense of I am limited, you may also be able to cultivate the potentiality to know and experience that I can create, like you're saying, move these limits around. Like I could
Yes.
create new limits, or I could
Yes.
push these limits, or
Yes.
I could take this thing that I know, right? I'm certain about, and I can start to do something with it.
Yes.
Um, but most people, like I was gonna say with the cleaning the house thing, um, or the cleaning the garage, what about for somebody who feels like that's great and all, like I really do know my limit and I feel my limit and I feel stuck and I want to clean the garage or whatever it is. I
Yes.
want to move around my limits, but
Yes.
I don't know how. I don't feel like I can. I
Well,
mean, yeah.
please. Well, there's another weird move here where the kind of limit that Hegel is emphasizing is, in a sense, one you don't feel or experience. That's actually the problem. It must be given to you by thought. Like the moment you say, I feel limited, that's you, then you know about it. You're not limited from experiencing that limit, right?
Mhm.
And so the problem there is you're actually overly identifying with your immediacy. And what Hegel wants to suggest is actually you need to identify more with the possibility.
Well,
And
that,
this
yeah,
gets
yeah,
back,
yeah.
I mean, what we're all alluding to here is the probability possibility distinction. It's which is always very, very tricky. But basically, when you think probability, you hit like let me put it this way. If you see everyone else's enclosures are ending up in like merry-go-rounds or problems, right? And you just take the step of saying, I'm probably in one too.
Right.
Now you can unleash possibility.
Exactly.
Probability leads and unleashes
And
possibility.
that's where this like determine what's your
Determination.
no, you're
Determinism.
saying your immediacy. What was the phrase you said, something like you're bound to your immediacy
Yeah,
or
you're
something.
bound to your
Yeah, yeah.
immediacy.
Yeah, and for me like the very kind of quotidian way to think
Yeah.
about that is like, okay, so this is your immediacy. You can just change it. Like
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's
it
right.
feels
When you
so
say you feel stuck, that's what I was gonna say. You
yeah,
say,
and I
I feel stuck. The issue is when somebody says that, they're usually not meaning they can't walk across the room.
Exactly. It doesn't mean they can't do the thing. It feels like they don't feel like they have enough energy, motivation,
Yes.
capacity to do
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And that's where it's like and that's hard. That's a hard feeling. I think
Yes.
everybody human
Yes.
has felt that at
Yes.
some point in their life,
Yes.
and it
Yes.
feels really frustrating,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
But that
but that
means
means that again, when you can realize, okay, wait a second, this this again, there is something going on here. I can physically do it. I might need a little more energy or something like that. So let me think about how I can learn
yes.
about energy, etc. But like I can physically do it. So this is where actually I think maybe you almost need to turn off the thinking now. Like
Yes,
just
absolutely.
stop thinking about
Uh-huh.
it.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Mhm.
Literally, like
Yeah.
Shia LaBeouf. Like
Mm.
just just do it. Do the thing. See what that does for you. You know, but again, it's really like you're saying, a victim of our phenomenology. I
Yeah, a
love that
victim of
phrase because
phenomenology.
what often we do is we. This is where the excuses can come
Yes.
in, and I get it. Like these can feel very valid. These can feel very rational. These can feel very um
Yes.
undeniable, right? Or unmovable, right? But really, like, just find a way. Find a way, get creative. Again, that will require more energy. So there is that question maybe still for people of like, well,
Yes.
how do I get
Yes.
big more energy? But as soon as you can do it, even if you could do a little bit of it, do that. Like Sherry and I had a great talk with Megan and Sherry, and she was talking about like the overwhelm of like taking down a Christmas tree, like and the
Yeah,
ornaments,
just take one
and
ornament.
just take one ornament at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do one little thing at a time. It is like that. There is power, and there is real like you are doing something and doing it even in small bits. It's
Yes.
okay. You
Yes.
can do that and it matters. And
Yes.
just start doing it. And I think that's where, yeah, again, that's where, like, again, you have to do the thinking, like you're talking about. The abstract thought has to
Yes.
help show you your limits, but then you also get to a place where you need to stop. I mean, I want to say stop thinking. You're still going to be
Yes.
thinking, but like you need to just go ahead and do this conditions of possibility. Literally, make your condition different. Change the thing.
Yes.
Move.
Yes.
Clean out that closet for some. What do,
Yes.
and that's what the village women will talk about a lot too. Do these things, like
Yes.
just do it, because you can't and see, it does feel non-natural. Well, what does that have to do with me
Yes,
feeling
it's
better over here?
non-rational. Yes.
Just do it, see what
Yes.
happens,
Yes.
and you can't. It's yeah, there's so much about that, kind of being able to just I don't want to say make yourself, but kind of like give yourself a simple goal and do it, and the power that can, because it starts to train you of, I'm able,
I can do the
I can do
non-rational.
this.
Yeah, I can do the
Yes,
non-rational.
exactly.
Yeah,
And maybe
otherwise
that seems too simple. I understand that it can feel hard in stuckness, because stuckness feels very sticky, and it feels very difficult to be move beyond it. But again, that's where I think a lot of this non-rational leap of faith comes in, where um you have to sort of see the own value in what you can do, even in the little,
yes.
and it
Well,
being able to yield to big
yes.
shifts.
Well, there's doing the little things to leading to large transformation. It takes longer than you think, but not longer than you fear.
Yeah.
It's not going to take 20 years. It's going to take like 8 months.
Mhm.
Is that a long time? Yeah. But is it 20 years? And
Yeah.
it's those little steps because you get the compounding stuff,
Hmm.
right? And I'm not saying that people don't have traumas that can never be entirely fixed, but when we're talking about liberating the energy again or
Exactly.
changing the energy,
Exactly.
I have found it very helpful to think in terms of it takes longer than you think, but not longer than you fear. Please.
Yeah. No, that's all good. That's very good. And I recently was having my own experience with kind of this sense of what do you do to be able to feel like you're building something? Like, I mean, sometimes you have to kind of give yourself something that's a lot like more concrete, because sometimes the things you're building, you do feel it, but there's a little bit like, okay, that's good, and I love that, and I'm great, I'm happy, it's very happy to be building that. And then also I want to be able to have a specific goal of something that I can be building. And this is the funny thing with this non-rational stuff, is that suddenly you have an idea. You
Yeah.
get ideas to be like, okay, this is a specific kind of type of project that I would like to build toward.
Yes.
And it can literally just mean every day, or whenever it comes up to your brain, add to your little list
Yes.
of whatever it is, right? If
Yes.
maybe you're writing something, this
Yes.
particular thing is a writing thing. So it's like, just make it, just orbit it. And that's the funny thing. Like we have the Ouroboros, this ablative form, and this is
It's the
where it
orbit.
maybe contradicts my
Yes.
arrow analogy
Yes.
before, but
Yes.
it's this, and maybe unless the arrow is going around Earth or
Sure.
something like that. But there's this idea of like orbiting is this ablative form of going in a
Yes.
circle,
Yes.
because you're saying it goes on and on, this
Yes.
Hegelian, like,
Yes. Yes.
abstract thought that then makes you your
Yes.
limits, and you keep doing, and you keep
Yes.
engaging, and all of this is actually the upward spiral.
Yes. Yes.
But it
Absolutely.
is a orbiting,
Yes.
but it's not stuck. It's
Correct.
orbiting, but it's
Correct.
moving.
Correct.
So it's like
Correct.
the helix of the DNA or something like that. But
Well, if
continue.
you don't orbit, I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to see the thing you need to hit. You're not
Yeah.
going to see the mark.
Yeah.
There's this idea that whatever mark is given by your immediacy is not the correct one, right?
What was that, babe?
That if the phenomenology of the human being is
Yeah.
prone to basically experience as the mark that which is not the mark, then the likelihood of you missing the mark when you think you hit the mark is
Mhm.
very high unless you do this orbiting structure that is facilitated by absolute noise,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you will, right?
Absolutely. So yeah,
Um,
there's a lot there. Let's talk about your
there's
way.
so also too on this idea of kind of the open circle in a certain sense being the open circle is the correct orientation that is going to be what affords sanctification.
By open circle, do you mean the
Like and it's not an enclosure, it's kind of an open circle. And yes, it could have that structure. That's
because it's
fine.
circular from the
Yes,
top, but then
yes,
you look at
yes.
it.
And it
Yeah.
actually yes, that's fine. And absolutely. But there's something about where when somebody is saying, I am stuck,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
can't mean in the physical world.
Right.
They mean in the energetic, or we'll say the
Psychological.
metaphysical
Yeah.
sense, if you
Metaphysical.
will,
Right.
right?
Right. 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 Right.
So the question is the following. Is it ontologically, like in the being of the human being, is it possible ontologically to be a closed circle? Is what I want to say, an
Hmm.
enclosure, right? Well, if in Christianity, no, it's not possible to be a closed circle. You must always have an opening, right? And basically, there's a suggestion that when Hegel says that I chooses other in the movement into reason, like that, that's where you're actually saying no, openness is part of reality,
Mm.
right? Now, can you prove that? Well, no, but you can identify qualitative transformations. You can kind of pay attention and say it would seem as if there's some sort of openness that is part of reality, right? Well, that would mean if there is no closed circle in reality, there's no enclosure, right? That if you identify with an enclosure, then you are not discussing reality. You're saying, I'm stuck. That can't be true because reality doesn't have the possibility of a closed circle. You see what I'm saying, right? That metaphysically, reality is an open circle. And the openness is precisely this is the weird move. The openness is precisely afforded by the limit from experiencing limit. You can't experience your own limit, so it's open. If you could experience your own limit, then it could be enclosed, right? But if there's
Well,
something, there's always an excess. Do
mm,
you see what I'm saying? Like if you can't experience your own limit, there's always an excess. Therefore, the circle of yourself is never entirely closed,
mm,
right? But because you're limited from experiencing the limit, you can choose to say there are no limits, which then means you're limited because you're finished. Like that's you can say that no, there are no limits. Therefore, I'm stuck. Because it's not that the stuck's a limit you can overcome. It is just a reality. It's just what is the case,
mm,
right? So there's this weird move like Hegel stresses a limit you identify as one you've overcome. Like if you identify a limit, you've overcome it. You've gone past it, right? Like
mm.
because you can't really if you identify a limit, then it's something that's come into your intelligibility that you can manage, you can deal with now. You've kind of integrated into your life, right? So the thing is, when a person says I'm stuck,
Yeah.
that sounds like they're acknowledging a limit, but really they're acknowledging that there are no limits, that this is the case. This is just the case, right?
It's like the state of being.
It's the
And
state
this
of
was
being.
very atmospheric. It's like
Yes.
this cloud. It can feel like a cloud over somebody's head, right? It's
Yes.
like this. It's not like, oh, there's the hurdle. There it is.
Yes.
I see it.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to
Yes.
jump over it.
Yes.
It's not that way. It feels more like all-consuming state of being,
Yes, and there are these
right?
very weird moves that Hegel make, but they're very
Mm,
powerful in a kind of foundational way. Because if
mm,
we take the question, okay, well, is reality an open circle? That this is the language I'm using today. Which the other language would be AA or AB.
mhm.
Is reality an open circle or is it a closed circle? Right. The very fact that you can't know for sure, thus means it's an open circle.
That's true.
That's the weird move. That's the meta move. That means if you can't know for sure, that means there's an excess, therefore it's an open circle. There's a lack, kind
Right.
of capital L lack in that
Well,
sense.
I was also thinking that, but the fact that we talked about the fact that humans seem to have this ontological, well, if we want to say they have this ontological enclosure structure or
Uh,
like this, to me that almost makes me think that it really is a perspective thing because like say we have the spiral, okay,
yes,
we got the little
yes,
spiral,
yes,
all right, it's like a paper.
yes,
Well, if you flatten it, it just looks like an enclosed circle,
yes,
okay, but like when you pull it up and you're like,
yes,
oh, no,
yes,
it's not enclosed, it's not
yes,
enclosed. So that's
yes.
it's a weird thing because I think what we're saying is like ontologically it's kind of like there's both of that.
But this is where the subject being real is a big deal because that means perspective is real. And this is why for Hegel there has to be a phenomenology to a philosophy. Because the phenomenology you you have to understand how perspective moves to basically have a sense of how thought realizes itself,
Mm,
because the perspective and phenomenology and perspective are not similes, but like
mm,
the way thought experiences itself is part of the development of thought,
yeah.
because subject object or choose, it's all relation. Please.
Well, yeah, because I think somebody could hear this and be like, wait, didn't earlier you guys say that ontologically humans have an enclosure closure structure by their
Yes.
way of thinking
Yes, I do.
or
Yes.
their fallenness in
Yes.
theological terms?
That's correct.
So, okay, that's so we're gonna say, let's just say that's still true.
Yes.
And ontologically, they are how was they have the capacity to be sanctified.
Yes, but
So these
this is
things
the
are at
million
the
dollar.
same
Like,
time.
honestly, for me, there's something that Hegel is doing that is extremely useful to understand the tension between, I suppose you could say, Protestantism, Catholicism, and Orthodoxy. Like,
Mhm.
because you could say Protestantism, a lot of Protestantism has an emphasis on fallenness.
Yes,
Not all, but a lot.
generally.
Catholicism more on, say, an ontology, analogy of being, sanctification, all these things, and and so how do you put those together? Well, there's a way in which the suggestion here is that sin, maybe ontophenomenology, but the word phenomenology includes an ontology. Sin is phenomenological, so it doesn't have substance,
Right, right.
and
Yes.
yet it is a real causal factor.
Mm,
Okay, and so, but the ontology of sanctification is precisely of such a condition that it must have the possibility of the phenomenology of sin, enclosure and closing off, right? Because because the very mechanism of eternal sanctification is being limited from experiencing limit, which means there's always work for thought, always
mm,
for contemplation, always work for the development
yep,
of thought.
yep.
And then if perspective and then thinking is real, then the thoughts you think changes what you're embodied, and what you're embodied changes the thoughts that you have and what you can experience, and you get this feedback. You get a qualitative transformation that is always occurring. And but that is only possible with the ontology of limited from limit, which must bring with it the possibility of saying, I'm not limited. I am, I'm God. I'm unlimited. I know the case. I am stuck. Thus it is so. I am able to just
Hmm.
say what reality is because you don't experience your limits. So you're reasonable to say there are no limits because they're not given to you by your experience. So why would you think they're there? It would have to be non rational in faith, right? And this is to me, this is kind of the premier example of the
Mm,
absolute
mm,
choice, because the absolute choice is lack is not nothing. Therefore, there are no limits. I'm limited from experience. There's no lack. A limit you're limited from experiencing is a lack. In the way Jockin means
yes,
it, will
yes.
mean Goodell's psychoanalysis.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're limited from it. But to say lack is nothing means that you're not limited from limits. So there's only being, because if it's
Yep,
being and nothing, there's no such
yep.
thing as nothing. There's only being.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you say there's lack, then there's being and lack. So there's that of which is beyond your being, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right? So to say I'm limited from limit means lack is not nothing. To say that I'm not limited from limits is to say lack is nothing, right? And basically the key to sanctification is an acknowledgement of lack. So in that sense, you need some kind of almost acknowledgement of fallenness for sanctification, you see?
Yeah, yeah.
So the phenomenology or ontoepistemology or whatever fancy term you want of lack is precisely both what affords the problem of a kind of structural sin and the possibility of sanctification.
Hmm.
But it must come together. It has to come together.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think that I don't know, just maybe it could be said that this sort of sublation of that ontology, the bothness of the
Yes.
ontology, right? If you want to say the fallenness and then
The
ontology,
AB ontology.
yeah, like fallenness and beauty. Because I
Yes.
try to think like what's the opposite of well, fallenness and
Yes.
sanctification or
Yes.
whatever. It's like it's the ontology of gravity.
Sure.
Because you need gravity to fall,
Yes.
but you also need gravity to fly or
Sure.
to
Sure.
run,
Sure.
walk,
Sure.
jump,
Sure. Sure. Sure.
right? So
Sure.
there's kind of this that force is both what makes you be able to fall, but it
Hmm.
also makes you able to get up, run, all of the things. I think planes rely on gravity, even though
Sure.
they're,
Of course. Of
but
course.
like that is actually what affords you to be able to be grounded and to be able to walk and so there's just something there that
Well, if we use Simone Weil's, without gravity, there'd be no grace because there'd be nothing. right? Like,
Mhm.
gravity is there'd be no planets, nothing would ever come together,
And
right?
gravity is kind of a
But
what it's like
I
a
think
lot.
it
It's a
works
lack is not
analogically
nothing.
because
Yeah.
if you didn't have the phenomenology of enclosure, nothing would make sense. Like if you didn't have the risk of,
Yes, 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 yes.
enclosure, then reality would not be intelligible, right?
Exactly,
Gravity makes
exactly.
reality intelligible, but if it has the final say and not grace, you have AA, self-effacement,
Right.
versus AB, grace, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think what also the key move here is if you accept you're limited from limits, then you're not bound, then your immediacy doesn't have the final say. And I guess to get to Naomi's question, I know we're running out of time and but you can't change the conditions of possibility if there is if there is no limits you're limited from experiencing. Like if there's only immediacy, then there are conditions but not conditions of possibility, right? There is what is the case but not different cases, right? And you can say, but I can choose different things. Okay, yes, I can choose a mug or a bottle of water, but they're all in the same horizon, the same being. To talk about conditions of possibility is to talk about something like you can change how being manifests, how you phenomenologically relate to the world. You can
Yes, yes.
change the meaning of your own thoughts to yourself, right?
Absolutely.
You can do meta moves. You're not bound by your interpretation. You're not
Exactly.
bound by how reality strikes you, right? Ultimately there is a suggestion here that all transformations of conditions of possibility, which of course is the transcendental thinking of Kant that's pointing to this, all changes of conditions of possibility must begin with with an idea that your immediacy doesn't have the last say, that you're limited from limits, that there's a deepening level, like, and basically the way you would like even think that thought, like, because I think that's what Naomi's point. Like, how would you even think that thought? It's a very strangely simple move that actually in like complexity science you make this one really simple move and it changes the entire way reality unfolds, right? Like you change. We started talked about that, and then I'll throw it to you for anything. Um, we talked about in the work of limits how complexity science, as I understand it, is interested that if you change the initial starting conditions, you can get complexity, right? You don't know what's going to happen, but you know that if you change this, everything that can happen is very, very different. The move that Hegel is making, it's like consciousness, self-consciousness, reason, spirit, religion, absolute knowing. And there's this key movement from, I think I said reason to spirit, but I think it's actually like for him, it's more self-consciousness to reason, where I identify with other. Because there's a way as I recall, that Hegel's basically like, you can't really reason until you identify with otherness. If there's no otherness, what's there to reason? There's only your self-consciousness. But of course, that move is needed to then kind of have spirit and all the other steps of the phenomenology, of which you have to see all of that to even begin a philosophy in the science of logic. But the point I was going to say is this extremely simple move that begins all of this is basically to say other people are real. You just identify with other people. You say I is other is the move for Hegel. It's not I equals I, A is A. You say I is other, A, B. You say, and the reason why I say that is because all you simply do is say, a lot of people get married not planning to get a divorce, and yet they get a divorce. So why couldn't I end up like one of them? I'm not better than they are.
Well, and the other thing is you can take that in a good direction too.
Yes,
I is other. That person was able to do that.
yes,
And
yes,
maybe I
yes.
can do that too.
Thus, you've
Yes.
changed your conditions of
Yes.
possibility. The
Yes.
simple move, like basically the only way to change conditions of possibility, and we've said that in different languages, but they're all saying the same thing, is to say I is other. I am you. I am the other. And this is why like Christianity, religion, um, stress relationships. And then of course you could point to the Trinity as saying I is other is in God. So
Mhm.
God is an ever-changing conditions of possibility within its own essence,
Yes, yes.
which of course opens a lot of questions. But basically, if you just believe that other people are real and that their experiences are ones that you can end up just as much as they can because you're not different, then that's how you change conditions of possibility. You believe that you're not better than other people. You believe that the things that other people fall into is what you can fall into. You just don't think you're better than others. And then this is the weird move. When you really get that, then sanctification can happen. So like sanctification starts in humility. Like the saint doesn't believe they're better than other people. They just identify with other people. The secret to full sanctification is simply identifying with others and
Mhm.
being like, I'm just as prone to get married and end up in a divorce as they are. I'm just as prone to do what I think is a good idea and it's a bad idea. I'm
Mhm.
just as prone to think I'm right and be wrong and never and no one be able to convince me out of it. I'm just as prone to anger as they are. Identification with others, identification with the quote unquote sinner, that unlocks sanctification. And then you can therefore see how fallenness and sanctification need one another
Yes.
in a certain sense. Because the shared condition of fallenness is what affords the possibility of seeing yourself as equal with other people, as like identifying with other people. If some
Mhm.
people were fallen and other people weren't, some people were saints, and then the saint would be someone who doesn't have to identify with the fallen, right? That's why, like, the shared condition of fallenness is actually kind of necessary for sanctification, because sanctification is only possible by an identification with others and being in the same boat as they are. So therefore, shared fallenness is the shared precondition of possible sanctification. Not that some people are sinners while others are saints, right? Because the saint simply identifies with being a sinner, which then kind of opens up the possibility of the ontology of the quote unquote phenomenology of the closed circle is precisely what affords the possibility of sanctification.
Yeah. No, that brilliantly said, brilliantly said. And yes. Um, yeah, I think that's huge because it also makes me think earlier I was thinking about that where when you realize that enclosure is actually just something we all have
Yes.
we are in a sense, right? Because we're in some sort of
Yes.
map, and
Yes.
but we can become aware of it. You start to have more understanding, empathy for the
Yes.
other,
Yes.
and that's huge. That's huge in terms of like aiding your relationships to self, aiding your ability to, like you said, change,
Yes.
shift things, etc. Um, I wonder if somebody might think like, well, that's all good and well, but what if somebody just says, well, you know, I'm no better than them. Well, that is a good, like, there's a
Yes.
humility in this that's huge, but I'm just thinking, like, what if somebody okay, here's a specific example, okay? I feel like in high school, I had a lot of friends whose parents were divorced, okay? So there was a lot of, well, how do I know I'm not gonna just end up like them?
Yep.
So they
Yep.
wouldn't
Yep.
get
Yep.
so,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
not getting married for a long, long
Yep.
time, if ever, right? So, like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, like I'm playing devil's advocate a bit to say like, couldn't somebody see that identification with
Absolutely.
other as a means by which to not change and to maybe
100%.
like get more enclosed because you're
And
like,
that would
no,
be a devious move of the you know how we were saying all experiences of the open circle are taken as a fear response, like
yes, yes, yes,
cleaning the
like what,
house,
yeah,
right?
exactly,
So
exactly.
you so it's an experience of the open circle and you want to close the circle again,
The
right? As a fear
identification with
response.
other leads to fear, or is like it's simultaneously a fear response. Yeah.
Yes, you're identifying with others to shut them out. Versus because here's the difference. You're not identifying with others to identify with otherness, meaning you can't predict, you don't know. You know, you're identifying with others to say, I know. They got divorced, so I'm not that would happen to me, so I'm not going to get married. Right. Well, actually,
Certainty,
it's certainty
closure. Yeah.
there, right? You're using the other to justify your projections.
Hmm.
Therefore, you're saying
Exactly.
it's others, but
But it's
it's
really not
you in disguise,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the real here's the I mean, it is very, very difficult to treat the other as other,
Yes.
and thus a mystery, and thus not a source of your own certainty,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But that again, you're limited from the otherness of the other, but you're limited from your limit. So what you have to do is basically hold a posture of I don't know, that aphoria of Plato, that open space, that unknowing. Um, and also too, basically, if you're using the other in order to have a plan, to have a plan of your future versus a call to courage,
Right.
that is a problem, right? What were you going to say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I was just going to say that actually, to me, what can be, very beneficial about this, I chooses otherness is because you get to actually like substantiate the idea that you could be somebody else. Like,
Yes.
okay, if I'm somebody who's really feeling stuck, you actually give yourself like the social imagination, like to
Yes.
use that term, I don't know what other term, you allow your imagination to say, I could be somebody who doesn't feel stuck.
Correct.
And even just that is a seed to
Yes.
say, wait, maybe there's something there that I can do. I can
Yes.
actually do that
Yes.
would make me feel that I could not feel
Yes.
this way anymore. So
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
So
That's good. Well, I mean, I guess for me on a practical level, like for that idea that where somebody's like, "Well, I could get divorced, so I'm not going to get married." The correct response I would say would be something like,
I can.
I could get divorced. Other people get divorced. That could happen to me.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure what is best. because if you say I'm not going to get married, then you're saying I know it's best not to marry, right?
Yeah.
But actually, if you hold yourself open, right? Like for me,
Yeah.
when you like with what Mimo said there, that meant like, well, I don't know if it's good to be married or not, right? But then I also don't know if it's good not to be married, right? So you hold yourself in the world where you're open to what occurs and meeting you, and then having the tests and the years go by. It's like, well, maybe this, and then what happens is that's confirmed because you maintain an openness,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the moment you say people get married, don't plan to get divorced, and they get divorced, therefore I won't get married.
Mhm.
Well, there's no openness. You're saying you know what is the case,
And
as opposed to
mhm.
letting time unfold
Yeah.
and as opposed to a certain humility and a slowness and
Mhm.
a certain waiting for justification, which that's
Mhm.
a topic, but for things to develop, to kind of see like, okay, where's the energy, where's the quality? Am I getting a girlfriend because I'm afraid of being alone?
Yeah.
Like you're constantly doing meta moves on yourself. Like the realization that, yeah, you could be one of those people that get married and end up in a divorce will make you engage in philosophizing your life, right? And
Exactly.
you're going to want to be with someone who can philosophize as well. And I'm not saying that you're going to want to be with someone who also is engaging in that self skepticism and meta moves on themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it never stops in the same way that you never care about your health because you're saying, oh, we've been married for 10 years, we're good to go. Well, you're
You never
always
stop caring about your health?
you never stop caring about
Yeah.
your health. Likewise, you always are aware that, oh, we've been married for 10 years, you're good. Well, you can always fall into an enclosure and self-righteousness. So you have to keep going to the gym.
Yeah.
But that awareness of I could, that's a wise thing, right? But you don't use that to decide, therefore, I won't get married
Mhm.
or whatever.
Mhm.
You use that to have a certain, well, awareness, attention,
Yeah.
Simone Weil, Ivan Illich McGillicuddy, attention to what is happening when you think, oh, this girl, I'm going to marry this girl. Well, pay attention. Are you sure? Like, what's going on? Is it maybe just fear? Is it just lust or
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah.
Like the awareness of enclosure should be a call to attention, like you fight the enclosure where it shuts with attention and awareness, which means you're paying attention to your own phenomenology. Like you're being aware of your phenomenology, which is a weird meta move because phenomenology is experience. So you're
Mhm.
being aware of your experience of your experience. And you can only do that with philosophy.
Mhm.
You can only do that with that certain kind of self-reference that naturally leads to philosophical thought.
Yeah, I'm thinking it feels tricky, but I'm thinking about how that relates to the limit stuff of Hegel because, like, in a sense, when you accept that limitation, uh, you're limited from knowing your limits or something like
Yes.
that. Um, and so what that means is like you're limited from, to me, I'm hearing it as it relates to relationships, where it's like you're limited from knowing whether it's right or like how
Yep.
you would
Yes.
experience the
Yes. Yes.
relationship
Yes.
because you can't
You're
kind
limited from knowing if it's right or wrong in a
yeah,
certain degree,
yeah.
but you're not
But you're
limited from knowing it's beautiful. I
yeah,
mean,
which
that's also kind of important. The fact that you're limited from limit means you can be struck by beauty. Like if you were not limited from limit, you would just be in the vector of the good because you'd be able to know what was good and what was wrong. But precisely because you cannot with certainty, that means ultimately action, faith, and courage are primary. And those are prerequisites for the strike of beauty. Now, that's a very large thing, but what you're looking for in those kind of spaces of unknowing are strikes of beauty, energetic changes, where time speeds up and you don't know where it went, moments of courage. Like you're looking for these qualitative experiences of which are thanks to the inability to be certain about good and evil in right and wrong in a certain way, at a certain regard, which many people say, well, that means we have to be nihilists and deconstruct
yeah,
everything. But no, it's actually the condition of the strike of beauty.
it's an invitation to pay attention as well,
Yes,
right?
yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. And I'm not saying you can't know good and evil or different things, but really what ends up happening is you can kind of know good and evil, like murdering someone is evil and it's good not to murder. But once you start getting into saying what is the good in a positive way, you're just going to say it's the opposite of evil, which Nietzsche was right about, unless you have the beautiful.
Yeah.
Then the beautiful kind of can fill
Yeah.
it in.
Well, that's where like again, is it good that the house was cleaned? Yes, but somebody was, had depression
Yeah,
because of it.
exactly.
Like but so I'm just saying like it's not that good is not good. It's just that it's not sufficient enough to inform
No.
the quality and the of relation, et cetera, et cetera.
But this assumes you're able to have a taste for experience of or quality or be able to identify the quality of the beautiful, right? Like
Yeah.
you're able to identify the beautiful or have a sense of the beautiful,
Yeah.
right? The claim basically is, and I know we're out of time, but the
Yeah.
claim basically is without an awareness of the phenomenology of enclosure without the awareness that you are limited from your limits. You're not gonna develop that sense. You're not gonna develop
Mhm.
that. Like it's not gonna happen. And so being aware that you're limited from your limits, aware of the problem of enclosure, that's what puts you in an environment, a meta environment, and we're habituated by our environments and our habits are our character, as James K said is correct about. Like you're not going to form habits to develop those senses and subconscious knowledge of what is the beautiful
Mhm.
or the energetic, and
Mhm.
so on and so on.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to sit a lot with that. The limit we're limited from no
Experiencing our
expectation
limits.
limits. Yeah, I'm gonna have to sit with that for a long time. Um, yeah, and just one more thing, this idea of, oh well, I identify with the others so that I enclose myself from a certain potentiality. I think people do this a lot with sin too, where they're
Yes.
just like, well, we're all sinners, so why everybody looks at this or does that or
Yeah.
everybody. So then
What's the point?
that like to me that is a cheap identifying with otherness, which
Yes.
isn't even actually genuinely identifying with otherness, because otherness would have you do something like change your life, like would be require courage, whereas this kind of, well, everybody, because that's, this identifying with otherness that leads to not paying attention to what you're doing, and you just kind
Yes.
of get into this void, if you will. It's like you to kind of reference Sam Greener side of Sam's work, but that's kind of you're not, yeah, there's something tricky there. But I think we have to be very aware of it, because I think it happens a lot. People think they're identifying their I chooses other, but they're doing a I chooses I in
Yeah. In
disguise.
disgust.
Yeah,
Yes. It's not other if you know what it means.
yeah,
Like,
and it enables you to do all your
yeah, if
addictions,
you say,
whatever,
well,
all your
everyone,
bad behaviors
everyone's
or
a
whatever.
sinner, therefore we can't do anything about it. You're saying you know the outcome. So it's not really other. It's not
Exactly.
other at all. You know the outcome.
There's,
Like
yeah,
you're only really taking otherness seriously in participation.
yeah,
If you're not participating in it, like if you can say, "Well, I know who this person is." Are you talking with them? Are you encountering them? Then no, you don't know who they are. You're not identifying otherness unless you're there. And that's why like presence and
mhm,
participation and all of that stuff, that
yeah,
you can't be serious about otherness unless you're acting on it. And if you're saying what it means and therefore there's nothing that involves you, that's not other. That's your projections into the other,
mhm.
which is a major problem. Yes. Th-
Well, and that's where I know you said earlier that abstract thought is a part of this, like
yes.
reaching our limits and stuff. But if you're in just pure abstraction, because this is the thing, if you're like, well, everybody does it, so that's who's everybody.
Yeah, that's
So
yeah,
like if
yeah, that's
you're
right.
completely abstracting, that's wrong. Like that's not going to be the
Yes,
abstract thought, that
yes,
because abstract
yes.
thought has to be tied with actually conversation, like
Yeah, that would be
engagement,
autonomous rationality, right?
participation.
Abstraction.
Yeah.
So here's the trick. It is only by abstract thought that you can realize you're limited from limit. But you're using abstract thought to actually change how you experience the crepe myrtle in front of you. Because you're limited from experiencing your limits of your experience of the crepe myrtle, right? So you're using abstract thought not to say something about the crepe myrtle, like top down,
Mhm,
right? You're
mhm.
using your abstract thought to help you actually finally encounter it. Because you're saying, oh, there are limits to my experience of that crepe myrtle I can't experience. So let me just try to really attend to that crepe
Yes.
myrtle, because that doesn't mean those limits are absolute. That might be absolute, but those limits can move.
Yeah.
Because if I say the limits can't move, then I'm saying I know something about the limits that I'm limited from knowing,
Yeah. Exactly. I
right?
see. I see.
And
Tactile.
and so you're using abstract thought to unveil what is in front of you.
To open yourself up to what it has to
Yes,
show
to
you.
unveil and to open this reciprocalness,
Yeah.
right? As
Receptivity.
opposed to abstract thought to say, I know the great
Write
model,
that down.
right? That it's down, right? But you're only going to use abstract thought in service of making the world more concrete. Because that's actually what's being pointed to. Hegel's like, you want to use abstract thought to make the world more concrete. It just turns out that the concrete world is an unfolding mystery. The most concrete thing in the world is mystery. That which you know, there's more to know. That's where he's saying like where Kant's noumenon, and of course many people have different readings of Kant, but the idea is where for Kant the noumenon keeps us from the thing. There's a way in which Hegel is saying the noumenon is for us. We're
Yes.
being kept from
Yes.
the thing, so there's always more to know.
Exactly.
We're being kept from the full presence precisely so that there's more becoming. And
Exactly.
becoming is a big emphasis in,
Mhm,
in Hegel, right?
mhm,
So abstract thought is for the sake of of bringing out the concrete,
mhm,
and to making you participate in it. But you're not going to use abstract. It's almost seemingly impossible to use abstract thought that way unless you believe you're limited from limits. Because
mhm.
why would you use abstract that? Why would you use abstract thought that way unless you believed you were limited from limits? Like unless you believed you couldn't fully experience what was in front of you, right? Like you would think abstract thought had nothing to do what was in front of you, unless you believed there was something in what was given by your immediacy that you couldn't fully access, but
Mhm.
not because it was inaccessible,
Right.
but because it was that of which you had to give yourself over to access.
Yes.
Like you could say that for Kant, the noumenon leaves us with unknowability,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas in Hegel, the quote unquote noumenon leaves us with an unknown. If I say that mountain range over there is unknowable, you go, oh, okay, and you don't care. But if I say that mountain range over there is unknown, ooh, interesting. Now you care. You might go on an adventure. In Kant, everything around us becomes unknowable. In Hegel, everything around us becomes unknown.
Yeah.
And we can only be sanctified in relation to an unknown that demands something of us. But because we are fallen, we experience the unknown as also unknowable. And we have to choose, is it unknowable or is it unknown? That's the absolute choice. And if you make the absolute choice for unknown, lack is not nothing.
Mhm.
Now, the condition, the phenomenology of sin is actually the phenomenology of the saint.
Yeah. Yeah.
It develops as such. But I know we're out of time. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com. Amazon, all purchases, reviews are a very big help. And then all the other things, Instagram, all those. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.